Today I'm talking about some self-care habits that have really changed my life. I have always been a little obsessed with the idea of self-care. I don't know why. I'm just very intrigued by the different methods and means by which I can feel my best on the daily. And what are some practices that help me to be kinder and a little more loving to myself and to feel happier and healthier as well. There are 4 anyways that I've found have made a very big difference in my life that I want to talk about today, and they're less to do with very specific routine ideas and much more to do with broad mindset and general practices. If you're new here, this is my space for exploring concepts related to creativity and the arts, basic psych and mental health, and then generally what can we do to be really happy, grounded, creative people. So if that sounds interesting to you, go ahead and subscribe. Otherwise, let's get into it. So the first one I want to talk about is gratitude. And I feel like it gets a rap sometimes as sort of like a cheesy or childhood piece of advice, like, oh, count your blessings. But the science behind gratitude is very, very real. Simplest way to look at this is that our brains can only follow, like our thoughts can only follow one pathway at a time. If we're thinking in a really negative, sort of complaining manner, and we're seeing a lot of obstacles in our life, then we don't have room to, at the same time, be considering options and possibilities and listing things we're grateful for. Obviously, it works both ways. So if you have a habit of practicing gratitude, you are training your brain over and over again to see more possibilities and to develop a growth mindset, frankly. So if you're trying to grow as a person, practicing gratitude is very logical. And the more you try doing this, the more it will sort of push out these more negative, fear-based or obstacle-based ways of thinking, because you can't do both at once. So gratitude really unlocks a lot of doors for our mental and emotional well-being, and it makes it so much easier for us to enjoy our lives, and even then when we're faced with challenges and difficulties, to find the benefit in them. It increases our resilience and our ability to face challenges in an optimistic, proactive, growth kind of way. So the simple practice I've added into my life is that of right before I go to bed, taking a couple minutes to think through the day and review, what were my successes and failures, but more than that, much more than that, to simply list out the things I'm grateful for from the day. And it does make a difference. I can feel it from when I first started this practice. It's helped me to be more aware and more grateful, and it's made a difference in my perspective overall. You can go deeper with it too. You can practice deliberately thanking people or naming things you're grateful for or writing them out in a journal. For me, I like thinking through them at the end of the day. Whatever works for you, but gratitude is the first one. The second one is this idea of mindfulness. If you've watched some of my videos, you've definitely heard me talk about this before. I have another video dedicated entirely to this topic because it's so cool and so important. Simply put, it's the idea of being really present in the here and now and not giving a lot of our brain space up to worrying about the future or dwelling on the past and maybe thinking about past mistakes or regrets and things that we wish we had done differently. It's really the practice of staying in the present moment, and there are different exercises that can be done in order to encourage this kind of mindful way of living and thinking. But the most notable one is meditation, which I also highly recommend, and that is specifically something I've put into my own life as a deliberate form of prayer. So I will take a line from scripture myself, and I always, every day for 10 to 20 minutes, try and really clear my mind and spend time being very centered. There are different forms of meditation you can practice, and there are different ways to practice mindfulness as well, but this concept overall has made a very big difference in my life. It's helped me to be much more aware of my own emotions. It's helped me learn how to process my experiences. It makes me feel more grounded, more present in the moment right in front of me, and a little less stressed and anxious. Maybe the single most important self-care element I've ever added into my life was carving out the full 10 minutes a day for this kind of practice. This one takes a little bit more commitment from me, and I think that's part of why I've also found a bigger payoff from it. And you can do as little as 1 minute a day. That counts, and it does make a difference. But number 2 is absolutely mindfulness, finding some way to practice being really grounded in the present moment. Number 3 is physical health, and it's another one I talk about a lot. We have physical bodies. They are absolutely a part of us. They impact all of the ways in which we think and feel. And in some ways, it's very easy for us today to act as if we're really just a brain or maybe a brain and a heart, but to forget about everything else that is like supporting us and carrying us through our days, and deliberately focusing on diet, exercise, and sleep make a huge difference. This has been easy for me to incorporate because I'm kind of a wimp too about suffering. Like if I haven't slept enough or I'm really hungry, I'm immediately grouchy and I'm losing focus and I don't get anything done, and I don't like that. So I've been very deliberate about building up these habits for years. Even in college, I would never pull an all-nighter to study because to me it didn't make logical sense. I was like, my brain will not work for the test tomorrow if I don't sleep. And it turns out my logic was pretty on point. A lot of times we tell ourselves that we don't have time to take care of ourselves, so we kind of push it back and don't tend to it because we're trying to get ahead in life. But of course, our brains and our bodies don't work very well if we don't take care of them. And for many of us, it leads to symptoms like fatigue and brain fog and an inability to actually do good, clear thinking, good creative problem solving, and to really do our best work. So I absolutely recommend finding some practice to add in a little bit of discipline and self-care with regards to your physical well-being. And that might be adding in like taking a walk even once a day, or adding in a little bit of an exercise routine twice a week. It doesn't have to be extreme, but something to get us a little bit more in touch with our bodies and to take a little bit better care of them. Another thing I like about focusing on our physical well-being is that in a lot of ways, I think it's very difficult. It takes a lot of effort. And there's a reality here where the extent to which we are willing to sacrifice or fight for ourselves is actually signaling back to us about what we deserve. So I love to exercise. I have to work out almost every day or I get all antsy and irritated. It really helps me feel good as a person. And I have found that the practice of giving myself the challenge of doing a little bit difficult exercise is so good for me mentally and physically. So I knuckle down for 30 minutes and I push through. At the end of that 30 minutes, I'm living not only a very natural, healthy, like endorphin high from having done this work and having my body be a little bit in a fighting, energized mode, but I have the satisfaction of knowing that I conquered a challenge, that I set myself a difficult thing to do, and that I succeeded. So I'm building this sort of self-confidence. I'm showing myself that I'm worth effort. It's building all of these patterns in my mind that help me feel like I'm more competent, more confident, free person. Like that I can go out into the world and face other challenges because I could face this one. And in a way it feels almost small or sort of unimportant, but these things really do matter. If we have a habit in place where every day we're doing some difficult thing for ourselves, that's going to really kind of dig into our psyches in a very positive way. We deserve to be taken care of and to be respected and loved. And when we have habits in place that are reinforcing this idea for ourselves, like from me to myself, that's really big. It makes a big difference. So that could be exercise, and I love that because it's so tangibly difficult. But something like cooking yourself a decent meal, that takes effort, right? Going to the grocery store and buying good food. Turning off Netflix and going to bed. That's one I have a really hard time with. Going to bed on time. That's a really tangible one. You know you're like putting in an effort. You're making a sacrifice to take care of yourself. And it's this whole idea of treating yourself as if you were a friend. If you had a friend who was always sleep deprived, you would encourage them to go to bed on time. You would want that for them. We want the same things for ourselves. So the third one is physical health, and sort of in with it, this idea of doing something a little bit difficult for ourselves when it's for our well-being. Then the fourth one is generally the idea of patience. And this is so important. We need to be kind to ourselves. Most of us want so much out of life and from ourselves and our relationships, and that's good. I think it's good to like have high expectations, to want a lot out of life. And most of us, at least if you're anything like me, want to achieve and fulfill these dreams really, really quickly. So it's very hard for us to put up with ourselves because we're usually much slower than our desires. And that has to be okay. It must be okay, or we will completely undercut whatever habits of self-care we're trying to put in place. We have to allow ourselves to go slower than we'd like, and to know that we will get bogged down We will have bad days, but that the main thing is to keep fighting the good fight. Keep after it. And this is obviously critical if you're dealing with something more serious, like recovering from an addiction or fighting through depression. There's value in pushing through every day. And if you're in a really difficult place and all you can do is get out of bed and take a shower, then realize that you did that for yourself. Acknowledge it and be kind to yourself. And obviously it goes both ways. We don't want to cut ourselves infinite slack and have no sense of ownership or responsibility. We have to own up when we could be doing much better than we are. But it's that balance again that we can understand really well if we treat ourselves like a friend. If your friend was completely letting themselves go and taking no ownership of their life, you would probably, again, want better for them. And then if they were constantly beating themselves up and never taking a break, you would tell them to relax, to let it go a little bit. It can be hard to understand our own patterns and whether we're being too strict with ourselves or maybe too lax, and we want to try and develop a sense of self-awareness, of course. Journaling is kind of good for this. It helps us sift through our thoughts, and it also allows us to look back and become aware of patterns that we might fall into. Talking to other people is really good. Having friends or a counselor we can go to. These things make a big difference. We need to not get stuck in our own heads, especially if our heads have some negative, unkind thoughts. Don't want to spend all of our time there. So the fourth one, and it can be difficult to practice, but it is so important, is the general idea of patience and being kind to ourselves and knowing that it's not going to happen right away, but that life is a journey. Even suffering and struggles and difficulties serve a purpose. Whatever pain you may be going through or problems with yourself where you're not as good as you want to be, even that struggle to become better is absolutely worthwhile. There's a case to be made for saying it's maybe the most worthwhile is actually the struggle. So that's it. That's my list of 4 most notable habits I have in place for self-care that I feel have made the biggest difference in my life. I hope some of this content is helpful, or that maybe you find a way to apply it in your lives. If you have any questions or comments, please post them down below. I'm always curious to hear what other people's stories are like or what their experience is. Go ahead and subscribe if you haven't, and I will see you next time.